and welcome and thank you for joining another Daily Maverick Insider webinar. This evening's webinar is done in collaboration with the organization called My Vote Counts, which we'll talk a little bit about later, as well as with the Tshisimani Center for Activist Education. And the purpose of our coming together is to discuss local government, and in particular, this question of what happens when municipalities fail. I think many of us are familiar with what happens in terms of the numbers of municipalities that are failing, the costs of corruption, the costs of irregular expenditure. But this evening's focus is going to be on the human cost and what happens to people's rights, what happens to people's opportunities and hopes when this crucial area of the state ceases to function. We're holding this webinar not least because in exactly 20 days, it will be the local government elections on the 1st of November. So it is part of our efforts to create a more informed citizenry. When you vote, you understand what you're voting for, what is at stake. And I think we're very, very fortunate because the people who will be joining us this evening, in fact, who have joined us, are activists who are on the front line of campaigns for democratic, accountable, effective local government. And I'll introduce them both now. Both of them are facing challenges, I should say. But let me start with Phindile Kunene, who's in Cape Town. She's experiencing load shedding. She's the curriculum developer at Tshisimani Center for Activist Education and is closely involved in activism and training and advocacy around local government. Welcome, Phindile, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mark.
It's great to have you. I hope that the electricity does come back at 6:30 and that your phone lasts out until then. And then the second of our guests, who's just come online from Makanda in the Eastern Cape, Mr. Ayanda, Comrade Ayanda Kota, from the Unemployed People's Movement. Ayanda is a person who has a long history of working, campaigning for effective local government in one of the most dysfunctional local governments in the country. And he's going to tell us something about his experiences as well. So, Ayanda, you gave me a bit of a heart attack when you only came on 2 minutes before we started, but welcome as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Mark. But my apologies, I'll switch off my video because of the network issues.
Okay, that's understandable. I think it's par for the course when we're talking about aspects of local government. So before I start with both of you, let me just set the scene a little bit. As I said, it's 20 days exactly to local government elections. I think you'd probably both agree that this must be perhaps the most important local government election in our democracy. It has the most at stake. People's vote is most important. And yet it takes place in very, very difficult circumstances. We have the continued, we've lost Ayanda. We have the continued COVID-19 pandemic. We're between waves of COVID-19 at the moment, but we still face restrictions, we still face difficulties. We have corruption, we have demoralization, and all of these factors, I think, weigh heavily on people as they square up to these elections. So I think these are some of the things that we need to explore, Phindile, and I'm going to have to start with you and hope that Ayanda will find his way back into the room in a few moments. But Phindile, from your perspective, I want you to start by just telling us what does happen when local government fails. What happens to people? What happens to rights? What happens to democracy? And can you give us some examples of the price that we pay, but also talk a little bit about your work in this particular area? So thank you very much, and over to you to begin with.
Thank you very much, Mark. I see we've got about 200 people on the line, so good evening to everyone. I am having challenges with electricity, and I'm crossing my fingers that electricity does come back at past because my devices are giving me warning signals, but let's see how far it takes us. So Mark, to answer your question, which I think is a great question, I'm going to just tell two stories. The first story is in my area of work and what we've been doing. So we've been holding workshops and webinars with activists around this question of the municipal crisis, local government in crisis. What are the causes? How does this affect ordinary people? And what can we as activists do to change the situation? For one of these workshops, we did a simulation. So we simulated a community meeting. A community meeting at a particular street in a particular residential area, a fictional residential area. And we basically created different characters in this community. The story is important because even though it was fictional, actually the participants who were part of this workshop, who attended this workshop, told stories about their everyday experiences. So in the room, in this simulated community meeting, was somebody on a wheelchair with mobility challenges, telling a story about how the fact that the sewer network has basically gone bust makes life difficult and makes everyday mundane tasks even more difficult to sort of do and to achieve. In this very meeting, there was somebody who basically relies on the informal sector, who runs a hair salon, who tells a story about how water shortages and continued power interruptions has actually killed the business, even before COVID-19 sort of happened and affected the business. So you had all these different stories, people telling stories of how crime actually goes up when there's darkness, how gender-based violence is even more acute in homes where you find that when there's no electricity, where the labor actually doubles for women and so on. So this was a simulated, a fictional community meeting, but participants actually drew on their own experiences. And they spoke about the dangers of losing children to open drains, which of course happens in our communities all the time. Some of these stories make the news, many of them don't make the news. So that's what the failure basically means for ordinary people. The second story is one that's a little bit closer to home for me. And it's a story of the people, or at least one person who, I suppose through their life, we can sort of see the lives of the people of Putali Chaba in Maluti Apofung municipality, which is one of the municipalities again that is failing and that is continuously highlighted in the different reports and the municipal audit outcomes. But this is a story of basically me calling home and wanting to speak to my aunt and my family and to check how everybody is doing. But I know that I have to make that call before 6 o'clock because after 6 o'clock, everyone is already in bed. And I often ask the question, but why is everyone going to bed so early? And the response is that, well, the electricity is about to be switched off. We know this because our municipality owns Eskom billions of rands. And as a result, there are scheduled power interruptions. What that means is that the day is basically shorter. But it also means that even though it's shorter, there are more things to do and the labor actually doubles or triples for everyone, especially women. And because that municipality also has big water challenges, it also means queuing at times to access water through the JoJo tanks and all of that. And so this is basically what the failure of municipalities means for ordinary people in South Africa.
So it impacts on people's rights at the most fundamental level. As you say, access to sanitation, access to education, access to employment, access, and not just access to healthcare services, but it must have a negative impact on people's health. Because, of course, local government is the level of government closest to where people live. It's where government, as it were, hits the tar, where it hits the road. And if it doesn't work, then you feel it. You know, I think the stories that you've just relayed, Phindile, are heard across the country, across districts and municipalities across the country. Why do you think this situation has arisen? I mean, I don't think anybody would try to say that municipalities are succeeding, but why are they failing? What are the factors? In your experience, what are the key factors that explain failure? And I'm asking you this question because I want to steer this webinar this evening towards what we, the people, need to do to make them work. I don't think we can give up, but in order to know what we need to do to make them work, we also have to have an understanding of what underlies failure. So can you talk for a few minutes about perhaps the 3 or 4 key factors that explain failure?
I mean, so to respond to that question, the causes, there's no agreement on why municipalities are failing. There are a number of causes that are placed on the table and blamed for municipal failure. So it really depends on who you speak to or who you talk to. So when you look at what emerges or what comes from the Auditor General, from the National Treasury, and to some extent even Kota, the narrative there, which is basically the official narrative, is that municipalities are failing because there's lack of capacity. So we need to direct our efforts towards skills, training and building the capacity to do certain things, especially in the areas of finance, because that's also important for accounting on how public monies, public funds are used, but also in the area of infrastructure. Right. And then the second thing, municipalities are failing, according to, let's say, the official narrative. They're failing because their accountability systems are quite weak. There's no accountability. So the AG comes back year after year, identifies what's wrong in a particular municipality, tells those the people responsible, fix 1, 2, 3, comes back the following year and nothing's basically shifted. So there's something wrong at the level of accountability and also the leadership to ensure that there are consequences for those who transgress and who break the rules and so on, right? And then the third element, which is very important if one actually interacts with what emerges from National Treasury, is that municipalities are not doing enough. This is the way the story goes. Municipalities are not doing enough to actually collect what is owed by consumers. If there's about more than 200 billion that is owed to municipalities, and about 160 billion of that comes from households, with the rest being businesses and government departments, then municipalities need to do more to actually collect revenue and to make sure that residents, consumers pay their debt. So that's the official narrative, more or less. And then there's, of course, questions of corruption and all of that. But that narrative has become increasingly challenged today in South Africa, and it's increasingly challenged. And I like to think of it as that there are emerging pathways that tell us about the causes, but more specifically on how to fix the crisis. And these pathways obviously place the premium on different explanation in terms of what the causes are. So you've got a voice that says that the whole structure is wrong. In terms of how, that there needs to be a structural overhaul in terms of how local government is funded vis-a-vis what it's expected to do and to achieve. So something that basically says maybe the system is local government is set up to fail because it's not given enough money. The subsidies that actually exist to even fund poor households are far below what is required in terms of the price of those particular services. The equitable share or the share of national revenue that goes to local government is actually quite small, and all of that. So there's that one explanation that talks about a structural overhaul. And then there are other explanations which I will touch on when we come back, and I see Ayanda is back on.
Great, thanks. So the official reasons that you give are capacity, accountability, finance. But you think, and we'll come to this a little bit later after listening to Ayanda for a few minutes, that there are deeper structural questions around how local government is organized. Well, maybe you do think or you don't think that, but we'll come back to that. Is it set up to fail? But thank you very much for your input on those three critical areas. I'm also watching the questions and the commentary in the chat line, and just to assure people who are with us that we will come to some of these questions. But before I do, I want to bring Ayanda Kota from Makanda back in. Ayanda, you heard a little bit about what Phindile was saying, but you know, you're a movement activist on the front line of trying to make local government work. Can you just tell us about your experience of what is the price of failure and why you think municipalities are failing? Thank you very much, Ayanda, for managing to claw your way back into this webinar.
Thank you very much, Comrade Mark. Good evening to Comrade Pindi as well. Currently, you'd remember that in Makanda there was a time when the unemployed people's movement, we blew a whistle that people were drinking contaminated water with E. coli. E. coli means people are drinking water with feces. Makanda municipality tried its level best to make sure that people are not aware. So we blew the whistle to say, yes, it is true. Now, that's number one. Just hang on there. There have been monies, massive amounts of monies that have been pumped into this municipality and in this Makanda municipality to fix the water crisis. And the last money that was pumped in was just less than 150 million to repair the James Kleinhans Dam. So we don't know what happened to the money. There was no accountability to say this is what the money has done. Now it tells you, if they could not account for the money, it tells you that the money was squandered. Now, the implications of that is that people their dignity will be forfeited, and they will be compelled to drink water with feces. That is the implication of corruption in real terms. Another example that I can illustrate, there's a place called Foley's Ground here in Makanda. There was a construction company that was building a hall that was also supposed to refurbish the Foley's Ground. It's an old field, a soccer field. But I'm telling you today, just over 28 million was paid to the company. Nothing was done as far as Foley's Ground is concerned. I'm an ex-president of soccer in Makanda Local Soccer Association. It's LFA. So we ran the football out of our money, because you would also remember the role that sports play in making sure that it fights the social injustices and social delinquency. Meaning it protects young people from drugs and substance abuse. But I can tell you, we do not have any soccer field. It is a struggle. It means young people don't have recreational facilities. And these are young people that should be inducted in sport to create better people for tomorrow. Again, that is the price of corruption as far as human beings are concerned. It undermines us as people. It takes away our dignity as people. As I'm telling you, where I stay, for the past 3 days, we did not have water. So if one speaks of democracy, though you would say after 27 years of democracy, we long to be part of that democracy. We so long to be part of that democracy. We long to taste the lovely fruits of democracy and freedom. But it's a pity. Corruption keeps on pushing us to the extinctions of society, to the margins of society.
Thank you, Ayanda. So for you, corruption obviously is a very big issue, and corruption links to lack of accountability, because councillors and local government officials think that it's easy to steal money, and certainly what you've identified is a factor, I think, in every municipality in the country. I've been doing some research into Johannesburg City Council. They spent about 100 million rand on unnecessary fogging, so-called decontamination, and yet there are people living in the parks, there are people living on the streets. There's only 1,000 beds in shelters, but there are 15,000 people who are homeless on the street. So it seems to me that it's a combination of what both you and Phindile are saying, which is there is money that is being stolen or misspent, but there's a need that is greater than the money as well, and there's questions about the financial systems. I'm looking at some of the questions, but before I come to the questions, I want to stay with you for a minute, Ayanda. I mean, in your municipality, you have all of these problems, and yet people keep voting these people back into government, and the problems continue. How do you explain that? Are citizens doing enough to hold their local governments accountable, to prevent corruption, to ensure delivery, and so on?
That's a huge question. It's election time. The former IEC chairperson, Brigadier Bam, if I vividly remember her name, once said, the rigging does not start and begin only during that period of election, the 2 days or a day of election. It starts before. She was saying the rigging starts when the IEC and the SABC realized that because of the ruling party has got the majority seat in parliament, therefore they must get more than 80% of airtime on television. The smaller parties must get lesser time because they don't have many seats or representation or representatives in parliament. So I think that is quite a problem, because every time 4 or 5 yesterday morning, it was all about the ruling party. So it sends out a narrative that says there is this party, despite the problems, because we are giving the politician more time, more space. So you turn on the television, then you realize that we are getting the message of the ruling party despite the problems, and also justifying why they have failed. That's number one. I think it's something that we ought to correct, to say everyone, in particular the citizens, ought to get more airtime than political parties, because they've got 5 years. So during this period, citizens ought to get more airtime on SABC and print media and electronic media. That's number one. But number two, we are not doing enough as citizens, as you quietly put it. I don't know what is it that, I mean, because Mark, you would agree with me, because we are supposed to be presenting an alternative. But if you look at the alternatives of the left, for the past 20 years in this country, the last attempt was the Workers' Party. We have failed dismally. I won't say it is the people's fault. It is our fault that we have failed dismally as the left. We have not been able to capture the imagination of the citizens of this country. There have been quite attempts from the left side to say, we want to revive the left, we want to build this anti-capitalist platform, etc. But we have failed the people of this country deliberately. So we've got to take the blame. And unfortunately, we are failing when there are case studies. I mean, TAC did a sterling job in this country in terms of capturing the imagination and the hearts of the people, that it had many people. It did not have only followers. I mean, you would swear that TAC activists on the ground were doctors, that they were able to explain the language. So I'm saying there are case studies that we can draw lessons from and build an alternative, but we have failed dismally to do so. So it is our fault as well.
I agree, Ayanda, but what worries me is that we have 20 days to go to the next election, and people are presented with the same set of political parties that are tried and trusted in corruption and in maladministration, and there is insufficient work that has been done on independent candidates who are properly accountable to the communities they come from. But I want you to come back to that. I want to switch now back to Phindile, because I can see there's things she's wanting to say. But Phindile, you were talking about possible structural factors that condemn local government to failure. And I want to ask you this question. A few years ago, I helped to write a book called Making Local Government Work, an activist guide to making local government work. And it struck me at the time that actually people have quite a lot of power in relation to local government. People are meant to be involved in independent, integrated development plans, IDPs. People are meant to be involved in drafting of budgets. The Constitution says that local government should be development-oriented, that it should be transparent. Do you think that people have power, but they don't use that power, or they don't know about that power? Or do you think that the problem is that the system just won't work?
I mean, I think there are a number of issues. There are a number of issues there. Ayanda wrote quite a provocative piece a few weeks ago, I think, where he basically took on this idea of public participation and the role of citizens in shaping local government and making input in the integrated development plans and so on. And one thing that sort of struck me about that piece is that it mirrors the sentiments of many people who feel like those processes are basically about rubber stamping, that there's no political will to actually do what citizens are asking for. And that, yeah, it's basically ceremonious. Most of these events and activities are treated in a very ceremonious fashion. Rubber stamping fashion, that the room is actually not that open. It's quite top down. And I thought Ayanda did a very competent job in sort of highlighting what that means for people in Makhanda. And that sentiment, I know, is shared by many people here in Cape Town and even beyond, where people feel like the space is there. Yes, the Constitution says this, the Municipal Systems Act says this, but in terms of our experiences, there's a huge rift between what is promised and what was envisaged with what actually prevails in our communities. So I mean, there's that strong sense. But Mark, if you would just allow me to just return to this idea where I left off talking about the different pathways. And I was talking about this pathway that speaks about a structural overhaul, about local government being underfunded and the need to rethink the local government fiscal framework. So that view is actually gaining a whole range of supporters, I guess, with the South African Local Government Association being one. But I've also seen that the EFF is also hinting in that particular direction. But of course, a lot of people ask the question that maybe it is true that local government is underfunded, but whatever little rands and cents are there, we know they're actually badly managed. It was last year, I think, where the late AG spoke about how, yes, there isn't enough to go around, but we don't have the right hands at the till. So monies are being lost to theft, to fraud, to corruption, to the abuse of supply chain management processes, and all of that. So there are those drawbacks, I suppose, to that pathway or that position. And then I'm going to touch on just 3 additional ones. I think the most prominent at the moment, of course, is this idea that to fix local government and to fix what is wrong, we need to vote out those that have messed up and those that have presided over this particular crisis. And Ayanda and comrades in Makhanda are experimenting with that, but there are communities all over the country, in Gauteng, in the Free State, Northwest, that are basically saying the same thing: vote the politicians out, allow grassroots activists to basically take charge, because they know what the communities have suffered through years and years of mismanagement, corruption, and so forth. And then there are, and I'd like us, as activists, to sort of debate these different options and different pathways to see where they intersect and where they collide, basically. And then there are two others, which again have been used this one has been used in Makhanda, and it's this idea of litigating against failing municipalities and actually forcing the dissolution of councils that are not serving communities, and putting these municipalities under administration. And there are lots of experiences across the country of this, years and years of experiences. The last one really is this question which we see emerging in different parts of the country through the courts, but through other means, which is do it yourself. Basically, and it involves citizens taking over the functions, the roles and functions of local governments, either by building their own roads, by actually making sure that they provide water in one way or another, and basically plugging in where local government has failed and is absconded. But this pathway has got a number of tributaries. So the Daily Maverick did a very nice piece, I thought, which actually sets out this question. And in that piece, yes, you can see this idea of communities taking charge of these functions and bypassing failing municipalities. But you also see on the other hand quite a red flag, I think, in my view, where AfriForum is actually putting itself forward as a savior, asking citizens to sort of participate in a process to remove refuse, pay a nominal fee, and all of that. So there are big questions about the future of local government and what the future looks like, and these pathways have got possibilities, big possibilities, but there are also drawbacks. And as an educator, I'm interested in activists actually grappling with some of these drawbacks and possibilities.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that. Ayanda, I'll need you to put your microphone back on in a second. I do want to, Phindile, with both you and Ayanda, explore these pathways and these alternatives. Ayanda, I know that you, for example, have had experience with using the courts to try to get local government to work and to deliver. Is that a sustainable strategy to make local government work? Or should we bypass local government and just give up on it, as some people are suggesting, and run our own services, perhaps withhold taxes, or should we? I saw a comment from Angelo Fix, saying that there are over 900 independent candidates this time round. Are independent candidates the way to go? Ayanda, I want you to turn your focus now a little bit to how do we solve these problems, because really it's solutions that I think we need to be finding. Ayanda, back to you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Mark. Once more. Well, Comrade Mark, there is no blueprint. We don't have all the answers, but we are experimenting quite different number of things. Litigation is one, but we have seen and witnessed how the politicians have undermined that. So it's in the piece. I've written about in the piece, where you have over 22,000 people who signed the petition to say dissolve this municipality, and few politicians, not only politicians but predatory politicians, take a decision because they've got all the money that they were going to challenge the case and buy time until the elections. They've done so, but also undermining the will of the people. undermining democracy and eroding what was left of it, if there was ever. That's number one. Number two, it is this time of the year. In Makana, we have Makana Citizens Front that are contesting elections. And one of the calls of this Makana Citizens Front is you've got to depoliticize Makana municipality. You must have councillors that are accountable to their constituencies, not to a political party, not to Makana Citizens Front, but directly to their constituencies. They are also saying that the councillors will be getting just over 25,000 rand to 28,000 rand. They must take home a living salary of a skilled worker, which is about 15,000 rand. And the rest of the money ought to go back to the community. The community will have to take a decision how they are going to use that money. Even in council, Makana Citizens Front councillors will not be voting like head. That this is the party line, this is the caucus, this is the line. They will derive their mandate from constituencies and vote according to the mandate of their constituencies. These are some of the issues that we are trying to do, to say very key, how do we make sure that indeed, as enshrined in the Constitution, as enshrined in Municipal Systems Act, etc., that people are in the forefront of these municipalities, that people are really participating. It's not just a matter of they are participating in the governance of these municipalities, because the council is not the political elite that occupy the chairs in council chambers. The councils are the people. The councils are the people, not those that occupy chairs. So there are some of the experiments that we are putting forward as the Unemployed People's Movement in Makanda, and also as Makanda Citizens Front. But not only that, as Phindile said, we've got a program of participatory budgeting that we have been doing together with Oxfam to see what are the issues. So people are saying these are the issues. When last did you attend IDP meetings? People tell you that those are just spaces to contain our frustrations and anger. It is the show of the politicians. So we are doing quite a number of things, but there is just no blueprint. We are trying, and we are telling the people in Makanda, as Makanda Citizens Front, to say, you've got to vote the politicians out, because these municipalities are the powerhouse of corruptions, in particular in the Eastern Cape. You'd remember it was on Twitter that Eastern Cape is a crime scene as far as corruption is concerned. We've seen in Queenstown, a building was set alight. Every time you hear about Eastern Cape, it's corruption this and corruption that. We know what happened in Queenstown. They built a field of about 15 million. There is absolutely nothing there. We are a joke. So we've got to experiment these things. But there's no one way. There's no quick fix, Mark. There is absolutely no quick fix. We've got to struggle and present this what we think are alternatives. For what?
So cadre deployment, people are talking about in the chat, corruption, the role of particular political parties like the ANC, the lack of accountability, and you, Ayanda, are saying, yes, independent candidates are a way to go, because independent candidates can be made accountable to the community, that it gets us out of party politics. Are there any examples of successful municipalities that we can look at, Phindile? And I'm not talking about perhaps in big urban areas. I'm interested in, are there successful district councils, local councils in impoverished rural areas where you can point to and say, they actually do respond to community needs, they have delivered, and this is why? Or is the picture really just a bleak one of failure across the board?
Thanks, Mark. I mean, if you look at the municipal audit outcomes and some of the reporting that sort of happened when the audit outcomes were released, this case of a municipality in the Eastern Cape, which is quite poor, has a lot of unemployed people. But this case was basically being taunted as the example of good governance and what it means to actually use public monies sparingly, judiciously, and yeah, with following the law and all of that. That's a case of Senku municipality in the Eastern Cape. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. So in terms of the way things look in that particular municipality, and I think that's what made it attractive to a lot of reporters and journalists, and that's why it dominated the news when the audit results were released, is that here's a case of a very poor municipality, but where both the politicians and the administration seem to be doing things right in terms of accounting and all of that. But of course, there's this big question about things looking good on paper, but people's experiences still being experiences of poverty, experiences of an erosion of income and all of that. And the reality of the matter is that although there is a sense that we've got three spheres of government, there are many people who don't make that distinction. When they experience hardship, it's because, government is failing across the board, whether it's local government, provincial, national, and so on. But I think part of the issue for us as activists is to also define what we mean by success. So what does a successful municipality look like? Certainly for me, it goes beyond what the AG sort of says. It goes, the parameters are broader. For me, it goes beyond what the AG says when auditing municipalities and some of the things that the AG sort of looks for. I just want to pick up on a question, I guess, that is posed in the chat books. I think it's by Dinto Daunyane. And Dinto is asking the question, it's talking about increasing revenue. Because from Dinto's perspective, if we increase funding for local government, it raises a number of concerns because it might mean taking money away from education, health, and other spending priorities. The question I want to throw back is how, if we were to increase, he says no, Dinto says maybe we could increase revenue by municipality. The danger with that is that municipalities often read that as increased rates, tariffs, and actually become more stricter in terms of collecting what is owed. And we all know what that means for poorer households. We know that basically means disconnection. We know that it means basically things becoming harder to access, services becoming harder to access. So it's all good and well to say increase revenue, but there's a big question about how. That question is probably simpler for the metros, but outside of the metros, it becomes even more and more difficult.
Thanks, Phindile. Ayanda, do you want to come back? This question, what does success look like? And I put it to you, I asked Phindile, can you think of a successful district, local council, municipality? What does a good councillor look like? What should we be expecting of people? What can we expect of people? And what does success look like on the ground?
I think the problems that we're experiencing, as Comrade Phindile was saying, are quite structural, Comrade Mark. So in an environment where the crisis or the problems are quite structural, it cannot be a matter of a good or a bad apple. I think, to me, what we need to do, we need to ask ourselves, what is the role of a provincial government? And there's a lot of money that goes into the provincial government, and local and municipalities get about just less than or about 9% of the total budget, and some of the money goes into provincial government, and the local government is the closest sphere into the lives of our people. Whether you are demonstrating for houses, though it is the competence of the we take those resources to the people, into the local government sphere. That's number one. But number two, one of the key problems of our municipalities is the austerity, the budget cuts. Because these municipalities, yes, there is money. You can have this money, but it's not enough. It's really not enough. So we've got to make sure that there's a lot of money that is pumped into these municipalities. And one way to do so, we've got to get rid of this austerity, government austerity budget cuts off. That as a result, the social services are suffering. So that's. But also, we need to fight corruption. You can't have billions of money that goes into wasteful expenditure, that goes unaccounted for, in an environment where there's not enough money. So those are some of the issues that we ought to do in addressing the structural cause. Because what happens at the provincial, at the national level, it has an influence into the local politics. You'd remember during the tenure of Zuma, and how was exposed the vulnerability, how it was exposed at the local level. So what happens nationally has an effect on local politics. So I think, to me, that ought to be done. Those are some of the issues that it could be done. Austerity, do away with the provincial government, but be committed in fighting corruption. There has to be consequence management. If you steal, there has to be saying, okay, you have stolen. We must. I mean, in Makanda, we've got a Kabuso report. It's 7 years later. It has not been actioned. Not a single politician was made to account that are implicated in Kabuso report. So there is no commitment also on the part of government to say we are going to fight corruption. But also, as I'm saying, you understand, corruption itself is also quite structurally.
So what worries me, Ayanda and Phindile, is we have an election in 20 days' time. We're going to go back with the same bunch of political parties, with perhaps a new bunch of crooked councillors. It's too late to make the type of structural reforms that we're talking about to raise additional revenue. We know what the consequences are of local government failure. So given that on the 2nd of November, we're likely to have a new bunch of councillors who will imitate the behavior of the old bunch of councillors, what's your advice to citizens about how we ensure accountability and delivery going forward and for the next 5 years, Phindile? And I want you to be concrete, because I want to think that if I'm sitting in Deep Sloot, or I'm sitting in a suburb of Johannesburg or somewhere in Limpopo, how do I control these people? How do I make sure that the money that is available is used for my and my community's benefit? Phindile.
So, I mean, I think, that's an important question. And in a way, it depends on how you view what's about to happen in the next 20 days. So if we decide that all our eggs should be put in the electoral basket, then yes, indeed, I mean, it's do or die in these elections. But my view is that, I mean, it's also about building for the long haul. And the reason why I sort of listed all these different pathways is because even after the elections, this tussle and this battle about the future of local government will still continue. It will happen in Parliament, in different committees and in different processes. It's still going to take place in our communities, and we've got that opportunity to sort of deepen that. But speaking as an educator who works with activists, I think we do have a task as activists to deepen our understanding about these different debates that are happening, the emerging pathways, and to position ourselves in relation to that. I don't think that there is one answer. Ayanda sort of captured it, I think, correctly when he says there's no blueprint. I think perhaps the solution actually lies in a number of, or merging some of these pathways and making sure that they intersect in a harmonious way. So that's where I am as an activist educator, is about deepening the work that we do and making sure that that work speaks directly to people's experiences and what activists are doing in their different communities. Yeah, and I'm also aware that we're sort of running out of time, but I do want to pick up on something that I'm seeing here in the chat group, which is about municipalities that really do well in terms of audit outcomes, with Cape Town being an example, and the question, what does Cape Town do right? And I think for me, it goes back to this question, and it's not just Cape Town, so it's Cape Town, it's Ekurhuleni, right? At the beginning, I told a story of a fictional community meeting or a simulated community meeting. And one of the participants in that meeting, an activist from Khayelitsha, who's active with the Social Justice Coalition and many other organizations in Khayelitsha, asked the question, does a community meeting in Camps Bay ventilate the same issues that we do in Khayelitsha and many other working class communities elsewhere in South Africa? The answer, of course, is no. So people have different experiences of municipalities, even municipalities that are held up as well performing and so on, like Cape Town or Ekurhuleni that got a clean audit. So things can look good on paper, but people's experiences tell a different story. And if we are just stuck on, I think the indices that the AG uses are quite important, but I think we can't be stuck there. We need to go beyond there in terms of our imagination of what does success look like.
Absolutely. Ayanda, I mean, Phindile, you said correctly, we're running out of time, and as we hold this conversation, it makes me realize how big and complex local government is, and how difficult it is to try and deal with it in 1 hour, when we have to talk about finances, about electoral systems, about administrative systems, about how do we measure service delivery, how do we ensure accountability. I think this has to be the start of a conversation. I want you to think, while I'm talking to Ayanda now, a little bit about the question a number of people in the audience have raised about public education, about local government, so that people understand the systems of local government. But Ayanda, turning back to you, 20 days to go. I'm talking to a lot of people about these elections. I'm reading a lot about the elections. And one of the things that I hear consistently, particularly from poor people, is I'm going to punish the politicians by not voting. Why should I vote for these people? They're all thieves and they're all crooks and they line their own pockets. And so I'm going to punish them. I'm not going to vote. Do you think that's the right approach? Do you think people should vote or they should not vote? What would your advice be to listeners today on what we do over the next 20 days to try to get this accountability that is a theme of our discussion?
All right, what we are doing here, and I mean, we go to communities and we meet people who are saying that I had taken a decision that I was not going to vote, and now you've got Makana Citizens Front. I'm gonna give it a try. I'm gonna vote for it. So you've got people expressing those sentiments to say otherwise we are sick and tired of politicians. They have failed us literally. So you've got those people that members of the MCF we are able to convince them and say, you've got to give us a chance. But I think, to me, what is key, Mark, is to, as I said previously, it's not only about 20 days, but it's about these 20 days and beyond.
Right.
Are we able to work hard and build active citizens, not citizens that are passive? I mean, we've got a history of struggling in this country where we have been able, look at this country. It was not only liberated by people who were in exile or were in Robben Island. Men and women, ordinary men and women, kept The fires kept the flames burning in this country. So we've got a history, even post-apartheid. As I was saying, we've got a huge history of the treatment action campaign that was able to challenge government on the TAC when people were dying. So it is not as if we do not have that history. It is not as if the people of this country are unable to do it. We are able to do it. But as I'm saying, we've got to build, we've got to be patient, we've got to understand this is a momentous task, and this work that we have started now, we must take it beyond these 20 days of elections. This is an event, and the work is too much. I mean, the road is protracted. It doesn't want sprinters. We've got to have stamina. It's a very protracted road. So we've got to look beyond the election and say, we've got to do it. We have done it during apartheid. We have done it during the 1996 class project, and it's something that can still be done. And there are pockets in our communities that continue to show signs to say we can do it, whether through litigation, whether through protest, through quite a number of things. But as Phindile was saying, we've got to harness that and able to say we are going to go forward with it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you say vote, but vote is crucial, but vote is not the end of the story. In fact, in some ways, voting this time should be the beginning of citizen engagement, continuous citizen engagement.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Phindile, we've only got about 2 minutes left. So I'm going to ask you if you have any concluding comments. Then I'm going to flip back to Ayanda, and then we're going to have to all introspect about our own roles in relation to making local government work. But Phindile, you first.
Yeah, I mean, my concluding comments is I want to emphasize the issue that the crisis that we're experiencing now in local government is not a new crisis. We are very awake to it now because, I mean, there's the vote, but also things have deteriorated even further. But for the past 20 years, there's been a crisis at local government level. Some of the responses and the answers that come from the top, whether they come from national government and so on, it's been experimenting with different things that have not really worked or have not responded to people's needs and people's aspirations. So when you look at the past 2 decades of local government, there have been so many interventions from national government level, from Project Consolidate to Operation Clean Audit, back to basics, local government turnaround strategy. And now there's the big thing about anyone that you speak to from government about the crisis tells you about the district development model. But I think the answers are also going to come from below, and what activists are doing on the ground in different communities and what activists are experimenting with. And that for me is very important to watch and to make sense of, but to also connect the different things that are being done in different places, connect activists in spaces where they can share and learn from each other. And that's where I suppose the education comes in, and where we will be deepening. That's where we will be deepening our work and our efforts.
Thank you very much.
That's my conclusion. Thank you very much, Mark, and everyone.
Thank you very much. Ayanda, you have about 30 seconds if you have any last-minute thoughts that you want to communicate to the remaining 185 people.
Well, I think we must not make the mistake that is being made by political parties to only come during election time, and after election we vanish. We've got to continue with this work, to learn and to unlearn, to construct and deconstruct in the process. As I've said, we don't have all the answers, but we must be inspired that we are a history. We are a nation that have demonstrated resilience. And there are pockets that where we've been able to illustrate and demonstrate that resilience. So my appeal is that beyond election, we've got to join hands, all of us. We've got to make sure that we keep the debate alive. We keep the struggle alive. The question of accountability doesn't die after this election. We keep the politician on toes.
Thank you, Ayanda. I wish we could have had this conversation with 15 million listeners, including the millions of people who haven't registered because they've given up and become disaffected. We can't afford to become disaffected because lives are directly implicated, and there's urgency to resolving these questions. I'd just like to thank you, Phindile. I'd like to thank you, Ayanda. I'd like to draw attention to both of your organizations for audience who are looking to learn more about these issues: the Tshisimani Activist Education Center, the Unemployed People's Movement, and the organization My Vote Counts, which is also a very important organization working around critical questions such as party political funding, voter literacy, voter education. The purpose of these webinars is to empower us as the people of this country to make our country and to make our government work. I'd like to thank Nicole and the Daily Maverick team for helping us to put this together. And I'd like to thank all of you who have stuck with us for the last hour in the course of this discussion. I'm sorry we don't have easy answers and quick solutions, but I'm very glad that we have had this discussion. Please support the Daily Maverick, become a Maverick insider to make it possible to bring this type of real life journalism to as many people as possible. We depend upon you, and please support the work of Maverick Citizen. Please make sure that you do go out and vote, and please make sure that you tell everybody else that is family, friends, and comrades to vote as well. Thank you very, very much for being with us tonight, and stay safe and stay well. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Phindile. Thank you, Ayanda.